Chapter 1. The dog lay in the shade of a stunted palm tree, his head up and his ears at attention. He was scanning the desert scrubland, vigilant, the lines of muscle beneath the heavy fur of his flanks taut and ready. Even from behind him, I could see his tongue lolling out of the side of his mouth, flopping like a pink fish. "Duco," the man beside me said. The Malinois, a Belgian herding dog, turned to look at us, his expression keenly alert and his dark eyes intent. "Here!" The dog sprang to his feet and made his way across the dusty terrain that passed for a yard in the desert communities well east of San Diego. Under other circumstances, I might have tensed up at the sight of this 75-pound package of fierce determination approaching. As Duco neared, I could see recognition dawning. A nearly imperceptible softening of the muscles around his eyes let me know that he knew who I was. He also knew enough not to approach me first, though the two of us had spent the first few months of his life in the United States together. As commanded, he came up to Seth, formerly his SEAL team handler and now in his retirement Duco's caregiver, and sat alongside the man he'd served with on dozens of missions for the past 6 years. Duco sat, still very much at attention, until Seth told him it was okay. Duco looked at me, and I noticed that the fur around his muzzle and eyes had lightened a bit and was no longer the deep ebony that had glowed like a spit-polished dress boot. What hadn't changed was the slight deflection in one line of the isosceles triangle of his large ears. Some scuffle as a pup in his kennel outside of Tilburg in the Netherlands had left him with an identifying mark. In my mind, it wasn't a flaw, an imperfection, but a mark of distinction. I gave his head a few rubs with the flat of my hand, and then ran it down his shoulder and along his rib cage. He was still in fine fighting trim, but I noticed that he relaxed out of his posture a bit and leaned into me. I smiled at this sign of affection and appreciation for the attention I was giving him. "He's doing good," I said to Seth. "Always. He's a good old boy." Seth pushed his sunglasses up and squinted into the distance. "He likes it here. Looks a little bit like the sandbox, but there's a lot less action. I think we both miss it, but don't at all." Seth had spent more than a dozen years as a West Coast SEAL team member, the last of it as a handler working with Duco. Now they both spent their time together on a small ranch property outside of Ranchita, his property bordering on, fittingly enough, Hellhole Palms and the Anza Borrego Desert State Park. Having also served my time as a SEAL team member and seen my share of action, I knew just exactly what Seth meant. Now that I was working as a private contractor providing military working dogs, MWDs, to the Navy and training them and their handlers, I was slightly removed from all that. Seth and Duco had ceased being active-duty military only 3 months earlier, and both would have chafed at the idea that they were retired, and at all the associations we have of folks living in planned communities and riding around in golf carts or some such. Still, the transition for both man and dog isn't an easy one, and having trained SEAL team members and their canine counterparts, I felt a deep empathy for both sides of the partnership. I can't really say that it was a formal part of my job or that it was written into my contract with the government that I pay these visits to my former trainees. It was a privilege and an honor, and more than that, a great pleasure to see them still together. In most ways, Duco was still fitter and more capable than 99.9% of the dogs in this country, but that wasn't good enough for the kind of demands that he had to meet downrange in places like Afghanistan. Not only was the work so demanding, but also the stakes were so high that anything less than the absolute best fell short of the requirement. It wasn't a question of heart. Duco still had the drive and determination, but the inevitable toll from age and years of stress was starting to creep in. I knelt down alongside Duco and draped my arm around him. "Braffy," I said. It always amazed me that something as simple as that short statement of approval meant so much to a dog, that over the years teams like Seth and Duco had developed such a bond of trust that the dog would willingly and gladly place himself in positions of peril. A few minutes later, Seth and I sat down on the deck he'd recently built. Duco resumed his perimeter position in the shade.